Hello, and welcome to the Monster Painter. This week, I'm going to show you all the models I use in my Frostgrave Bestiary. What could be more fun?
Alright, so here we go. The bestiary rules for Frostgrave are officially optional, but they are anything but optional for me and my group. These are the monsters that may or may not pop up when a soldier picks up a treasure, and these random monsters offer a lively bit of chaos into the wild and swingy game of Frostgrave. True to the miniature agnostic spirit of the game, I will be drawing my bestiary from my broad and eclectic collection of miniatures in hopes of inspiring you, my dear viewers, to do the same. We're going to start with the paradoxically most mundane and most difficult category of Frostgrave monsters, the animals. Now, all of the animals are important because they might be included as part of your warband if you cast an animal companion spell, and the best animal to recruit with this spell is undoubtedly the bear. I have already lost a couple of bears to buddies who needed them for their warbands. I have managed to hold on to this cave bear from the D&D board game The Wrath of Ashardalon, and he's being backed up by this weird conversion, a GW Fantasy Battles giant boar with a GW wolf head glued onto it. Sure, he's a crazy looking freak, but he gets the job done. In the old days, Warhammer Fantasy Orcs rode giant boars into battle, and these plastic GW boars might be an easy fit for the role of wild boar in Frostgrave, but I think they're too big. So instead, I'll be using these much older metal Warhammer Fantasy boars for the job. Rats! Giant rats, or rodents of unusual size. Mine are all old Games Workshop models, but they are pretty standard monsters, and you shouldn't have any trouble sourcing some of these nasty gargantuan vermin. Even more fantastical than giant rats are ice spiders. For the time being, I will be using these giant spiders from the Reaper Bones 5 add-on, the Spiders of Emerith Cull. And while the models are nice and the scale is right, my paint jobs aren't very ice spider. I want them to look more like this matriarch. She looks the part, but she's way too big. Oh well, these guys will have to do for now. After all, a bestiary is always a work in progress. Still more fantastical than ice spiders are ice toads. I mean Arctic amphibians. How crazy is that? I will be using this Reaper Bones giant frog paired with this metal Reaper Dark Haven ice toad for the job. Now, if you're a grognard, you might want to use an old metal squig painted blue to fill the role. Creatures that actually exist in the real world can be hard to find in miniature form, but Nolzar's Marvelous Miniatures really delivers with their well-sculpted and perfectly scaled snow leopards. Thanks, WizKids, you really nailed this one. Uh-oh, looks like a Tory supporter has learned a lesson about party politics the hard way. So, I have this Reaper Bones Yeti, and he would be perfect for the job of White Gorilla. Unfortunately, he's unpainted. So I will be using this old toy gorilla I got at the thrift store. I think he was part of a zoo playset, and I have painted him up specifically for the job. I only have one snow gorilla at the present time, and I will need a whole bunch more because I want to table the scenario The Swirling Mists in the near future, and it requires a lot of snow gorillas. A surprisingly difficult creature to find a model for is the wild dog. Wolves and wargs are pretty common, and you can find your fair share of warhounds, but a mangy feral dog is not readily available. The best source I have found are the models from the board game Zombies 4: The End by Twilight Creations. Not only are they a good scale and sufficiently mangy looking, you get a lot of them. And I mean a lot of them. like 100 of the little beasts. More than you and your friends will ever need. And rounding out the category of animals is the classic menace of folklore and fantasy, the indispensable wolf. I will be using these old Warhammer fantasy battle wolves, minus their goblin riders. A little larger in scale than I would like, but they're still cool. And they will be supplemented by these vintage metal wolves of unknown origin. With those dangerous beasts out of the way, it is time to move on to the next category, those magical robots known as constructs. For the small constructs, I will be using these Reaper Bones toolbots, because the difference between sci-fi and fantasy, super science and magic is really nothing, and they are perfect for the job. For truly fantasy small construct, I will be using this animated broom I pulled from a Seen It Harry Potter's trivia board game. We all want an animated magical broom, don't we? At least until they run amok. Some constructs are actually reanimated corpses, stitched together by ethically vacant wizards. These two Eddies, produced by Ral Partha in the late 90s, will play the role of medium constructs. They also illustrate the deep connection between heavy metal music and miniature wargaming. They'll be backed up by this official Frostgrave model by North Star Military. I love this model and have nicknamed him Pencilhead. Some wizards can get exceptionally creative when stitching up corpses, and I will be using this abomination I recently finished up from the Dungeons & Lasers Encounters stretch goal box. And while he is terrifying, nothing says large construct menace like an old War Machine Warjack. He's big, he's metal, and he's produced by Privateer Press. That's it for constructs in the core rulebook. Now it's on to every edgelord's favorite category of monster, the dreaded demons! The least dangerous entity in this class of malicious monsters are the vicious little imps, and you could use mischievous little Warhammer nerdlings for the job, spreading their nasty diseases, or these Reaper Bones hordlings, or you could paint up some Quidditch balls from Harry Potter trivia games as hideous flying eyeballs. As I recall, they're from the Harry Potter Seen It trivia game. In a pinch, even old Pokemon models will do the trick. Dig around at the toy aisle in the thrift store and you will eventually get all the Pokemon models you will ever need. I, however, will be using this ancient Ral Partha model from 1979 and this much less ancient but still vintage Earth Dawn model known as Bognob by Heartbreaker from the late 90s. The role of a minor demon does not have to be played by an infernal creature or even an angel. Elementals can do the job just as well. That being said, the miniature gaming world offers a nearly limitless number of options to fulfill the role of minor demon. Every line of miniature ever created has some sort of hideous and creepy miniature suited for this diabolical role. The possibilities abound! It's easy to find an interesting model to play the part of a minor demon. Truth be told, the category is so wide open, it's an invitation to use whatever cool models you have that do not fit conveniently into a more determined type of monster. To this end, I will be using a couple of classic Warhammer Demonettes. I found them broken and repaired them with some Dark Elder bits. I will also be using this wonderfully wacky Earth Dawn model by Heartbreaker. Now, Games Workshop's Warhammer Fantasy, or Age of Sigmar, or whatever, leans hard into the category of major demons, and it offers a vast selection of possible models for the role. Even the Warhammer 40k faction of Tyranids has plenty of models suitable for a fantasy major demon. And not to be outdone, Reaper Miniatures has an excellent selection of possible major demons. They will claim your soul, but unlike GW, they'll leave your wallet relatively intact. And major demons don't have to be big, they just have to be scary, as attested to by this 1990s Leviathan miniature and this Rackham Confrontation Fallen Angel. With that all said, I will be using this pair from the Dungeons & Lasers Encounters stretch goals. I recently finished them up and I want to see them hit the table. The Wendigo and Lolith will be joined by this hideous pimple made out of a weird piece of plastic and known as Yogg So Gross, the Pussy Chaos. With the diabolical all wrapped up, it's time to face the most dangerous category of monsters by far, the catch-all of miscellaneous creatures. Easily the most dangerous creature in the core rulebooks is the mighty frost giant. While most monsters are a nuisance, these big boys are an existential threat. Because of the size of these creatures, the thrifty among us can turn to more conventional toys and other things to fill the role. I will be using this Goblin King model for my Hobbit trivia game for the job. I just painted him up blue and he's ready to get to work squashing soldiers. For those unconcerned with keeping cash in their pockets, the gaming world offers many giant options, such as this old metal Shaggoth by Games Workshop. Almost as dangerous as the frost giant is the dreaded giant worm. Said to be a legacy of Old Felstad's sanitation infrastructure, these massive invertebrates can burst onto the battlefield, wreaking havoc. I will be using Gormal from Reaper Bones, and he'll be backed up by WizKids Remorhaz, the original ice worm of Dungeons & Dragons fame. Shaggy, dumb, and eternally hungry, the snow trolls of Frostgrave are probably perfectly embodied by these old Warhammer Fantasy Yeti. And yet, for a change of pace, I will be using this War Machine Horde's Pyre Troll, backed up by this freshly painted Dungeons & Lasers troll. Because, snow troll or not, a troll is a troll. The werewolves of Frostgrave are not properly lycanthropes, but are more likely obscene human-wolf hybrids cooked up long ago in Old Felstad's infamous breeding pits. This dreadful role will be played by a Reaper Dark Heaven werewolf, and he'll be backed up by this D&D pre-painted werebear repainted as a panda bear, because I'm a very deeply, very silly person. And at long last, we're on to the final category of Frostgrave monster, the most essential creatures in fantasy gaming, the dreaded and ubiquitous horrors, the Undead. The armored skeleton is a classic fantasy trope, and as a result, there is a wide variety of models to choose from, both old and new, so don't sweat it, just find something you like. With all these options, I will be turning to the North Star Military official Frostgrave armored skellies, because they are awesome. One type of foul undead appears on the battlefield only as the result of dark necromantic magic. The floating skull is the result of such sinister conjurations, and when my necromancer Lenora casts this spell, she uses a crudely touched up Vargoyle, a pre-painted D&D miniature by WizKids. The ghouls of Frostgrave are the result of desperate, starving travelers of the frozen wastes turning to the flesh of the undead for sustenance. Yuck, talk about bad choices. These old Warhammer Fantasy ghouls can do the job ably, but I'm going to be turning to this old Earth Dawn Heartbreaker model and this Ral Partha Dark Sun miniature, both from the 1990s, to hunt the flesh of the living. Now, what low-level adventurer has not had to face the mortal threat of the classic and most disposable of enemies, the skeleton? This monster's commonness is reflected in the wide variety of models available to fill the role. I will be using these classic HeroQuest skeletons because nothing says tabletop fun like the bittersweet magic of nostalgia. Skeleton archers are not particularly good shots, but in the swingy game of Frostgrave, they are still dangerous. For the most part, I use old Warhammer Fantasy Tomb King models to get the job done, but my go-to skeleton archer model will always be this Ral Partha miniature from my 80s childhood. The most powerful form of undead in the core rules, no offense to the Lich Lord, are the dreaded vampires. In a fantasy world, they tend to come in two varieties: powerful, cunning villains who epitomize the idea of the big bad evil guy. This Warhammer Vampire Counts model shall fill that version quite comfortably. Conversely, some vampires are little more than feral predators, an unstoppable nightmare, hungry, desperate, and violent, to be played by this nasty-looking Reaper Dark Heavens miniature. For the ethereal and deadly ghosts, known as wraiths, I usually use translucent miniatures like these models. 3 are from the D&D board games, and 1 is a Reaper Bones miniature. But I'm feeling like a little old-school gothic horror, so I'm going to use these classic 90s wraiths from Warhammer Fantasy. And remember, stay away from the salmon moose. And finally, we come to the last monster in the bestiary, and easily the most common resident in the frozen city of Old Felstad. In fact, the most common monster in all of gaming, or horror cinema for that matter. Found in the distant past or the depths of space, wherever the words horror are spoken, these rotten cannibals can be found. I speak, of course, of zombies, and Frostgrave is full of them. These models are everywhere, and if you can't find some, you simply aren't looking. For my table, I will be using these 4 miniatures from the Reaper Bones 5 Kickstarter. They are shambling horrors dressed in medieval garb, and are thus perfect for the frozen city. So, we have come to the end of our journey through the Frostgrave Bestiary. And now, I will answer the most difficult question of all about the game of Frostgrave. The exact middle point between Warhammer 40k and Dungeons and Dragons.
Alright then, enough of this Frostgrave nonsense. I want to see a monster fight!
This fight is an epic old school Warhammer Fantasy Battles Battle Royale featuring the dusty old bones of a cursed company. The Cursed Company is a regiment of renown from the Dogs of War faction. Versus some rotting, old, stinking, disgusting corpses! A selection of metal zombies from the Vampire Counts faction. It's a living dead deathmatch, and only the old bones know who will win. Oh, well, that's kind of unexpected. Let's see how this plays out.
I still got no brains!
And there you have it. When strange eons pass and death may die, no one is the winner.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video. That can only mean one thing. You want to find out whether or not you won a t-shirt. Well, here's the hat. Let's find out. And this winner is Jimmy D68. Congratulations, Jimmy D68. I'll be getting a hold of you and sending your fabulous Monster Painter t-shirt in the mail real quick.
Next week, I'm going to take another crack at getting my video review of the old board game Omega Virus done. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and
ring the bell. Ring the bell.
You are watching Les the Monster Painter.